is a grave in the east corner of an old churchyard in England, unmarked by any name, swallowed almost entirely by wild grass and creeping moss. And yet, for years after the burial, the villagers would wake before dawn to find fresh flowers resting upon it, soft petals placed with trembling hands, not once, not twice, but every single night, without fail, as though the living refused to let the dead rest alone. No one dared ask who left them, because everyone already knew. The year was 1847, in a small, fog-wrapped village on the edges of Yorkshire, England, a place where the rules of society were not merely suggested, but carved into the bones of every man, woman, and child born within its borders. Class was destiny, blood determined worth, and love, true love, was not something a woman of standing was ever permitted to feel freely. She was permitted to marry well, to be obedient, and to be silent. That was the contract the world had written for her before she even drew her first breath. Her name was Eleanor Ashworth. She was the eldest daughter of Lord Ashworth, a man whose name carried the weight of old money and older pride. Eleanor was 23, educated in the proper ways, spoken of in hushed admiration at every gathering. Her grace, her composure, her suitability for a man of equal rank. From the outside, she appeared exactly as the world demanded, quiet, composed, untouched. But inside, Eleanor Ashworth was burning. His name was Thomas Hale. He had arrived at the Ashworth estate in the spring of that year, hired as a stonemason to restore the crumbling outer walls of the property. He was the son of a coal miner, rough-handed, sun-darkened, with no title, no inheritance, and no future that the village would ever consider worthy. He was, by every measure society cared about, beneath her, invisible to her world. And yet, fate has never cared much for society's measurements. They first spoke on a Tuesday morning, when Eleanor was walking the garden path and Thomas had paused in his work to watch a sparrow that had landed near his tools. It was such a quiet, gentle moment, a man of labor, still and soft-eyed over a small bird, that Eleanor stopped without thinking. They exchanged only a few words, something about the weather, something ordinary. But there was nothing ordinary about the way those words settled inside her chest, like stones dropped into still water, sending ripples she could not explain. After that, it was glances, then longer walks that happened to pass near where he worked, then conversations that stretched longer than they should have. He spoke to her not as a lord's daughter, but as a person, asking what she thought, what she believed, what she dreamed of. No man of her class had ever asked Eleanor Ashworth what she dreamed of. By midsummer, they were meeting in secret, in the far corner of the garden where the stone wall met the shadow of the oldest oak tree on the property. They met at dusk, when the household had drawn its curtains and the world had turned away. She would bring him nothing. He would bring her nothing. They needed nothing but each other's presence and the stolen hours they carved out from a world that would have destroyed them both for taking them. Eleanor knew it was dangerous. Thomas knew it even more. But when you have found the one person who makes your soul feel recognized, truly, deeply recognized, danger becomes a distant and manageable thing. Love has a way of convincing the heart that it can outrun consequences. It cannot. By late autumn, the whispers had begun. A stable boy who worked late had seen them once. A housemaid had noticed the mud on Eleanor's hem too many evenings in a row. Suspicion grew the way mold grows in a dark corner, slowly, silently, and then all at once. Lord Ashworth began to watch his daughter with narrowed eyes. Her intended, a wealthy man from a neighboring estate, had noticed her growing distance and began asking questions. Eleanor and Thomas had tried to be careful, but caution is a fragile shield, and the world around them was already sharpening its blade. One November night, Thomas did not appear at the oak tree. Eleanor waited until the cold had crept into her lungs and the moon had moved across the sky. She told herself he had been delayed. She told herself there was an explanation. She returned to the house with frost on her eyelashes and a dread she could not name sitting heavy at the base of her throat. She would learn by morning what had happened. Thomas had been found that same evening by two of Lord Ashworth's men. He had been accused, not formally, not with the dignity of a court, but accused privately, as was the privilege of men with power. He was taken from his lodgings in the village that night. What happened in the hours that followed was never spoken of openly, not even by those who had carried out the orders. By the time the sun rose over Yorkshire, Thomas Hale was dead. The official account offered to the village was brief and cold. An accident, a fall, a tragedy of circumstance. His body was buried quickly, without ceremony, in the far corner of the churchyard, the section reserved for those the church considered unworthy of marked ground. His grave bore no name, no stone, only earth. Eleanor was told nothing directly. She was told only that the stonemason was gone, that she was to compose herself, and that arrangements for her upcoming engagement would proceed as planned. She sat very still when she received this news. She did not weep. She did not speak. She simply sat with her hands folded in her lap and stared at the wall in front of her for a very long time. Those who saw her in those hours later described the expression on her face as something that frightened them. Not grief exactly, but something beyond grief. Something that had passed through grief and arrived somewhere much darker. She found his grave on the third night. No one knew how. There had been no announcement, no marker, no guide to lead her there. And yet she walked through the churchyard in the deep of night and stopped at the right patch of earth, as though something beneath it had called her name. She knelt in the wet grass and pressed her hands against the cold ground and did not move for a very long time. After that, she came every night, without exception, through frost and fog, through December's cruelest winds, through snow that buried the churchyard in white silence. Eleanor Ashworth came. She brought flowers when they could be found. She brought nothing when they could not. But she always came, and she always knelt, and she always stayed far longer than any living person had reason to. Her family threatened her. Her intended withdrew from the engagement entirely. The village began to talk of her in lowered voices, the way they talked of things that unsettled them, with a mixture of pity and fear. They called her broken. They called her cursed. A local vicar attempted an intervention. She listened to him speak, and then, when he had finished, she rose quietly, walked to the churchyard, and knelt at Thomas's grave as though the conversation had never happened. She stopped eating with the family. She stopped attending gatherings. She stopped being the Eleanor Ashworth the world had so carefully constructed and maintained. Whatever that woman had been, she had left her behind in a garden at dusk, beneath an oak tree, in the last warm days of a summer that had already passed. By spring, she was a shadow, thin as paper, pale as the fog that rolled across the moors each morning. The servants left food outside her door and found it untouched. She slept through the days and disappeared through the nights. Her father, a man not given to sentimentality, reportedly wept once while looking at her through a window, watching her walk the dark road to the churchyard like a woman already halfway to the other side. She died in the April of 1848, quietly, without drama, as though she had simply decided she had stayed long enough. The morning they found her, she was not in her bed. She was at his grave. Her body was found in the early hours, lying across the mound of earth that covered Thomas Hale, her cheek pressed against the ground, one hand spread flat against the soil, as though, even in her last moments, she had been trying to reach him. Those who discovered her said nothing for a long time afterward. What was there to say? Some grief writes its own final chapter. Some love cannot be separated.
not even by death. They buried her elsewhere, as her family insisted, apart from him. Proper, correct, in keeping with every rule she had broken in life. But the villagers, for years after, continued to find fresh flowers on Thomas Hale's unmarked grave, soft petals, left in the dark, by no one anyone could ever name.
Some love stories are never meant to be forgotten, only whispered through time. If this story moved something in you, if you felt the weight of Eleanor's love and the cruelty of a world that could not hold it, then you belong here. Subscribe to Echoes of Forbidden Love, and every week we will bring you another forgotten soul, another silenced heart, another story that history tried to bury but could never truly destroy.